Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Ms. Drennan, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Let's do this. Commissioner Graham?
I'm here, thank you.
Commissioner Hutton?
Here.
Commissioner Skinner?
Here.
Chair Needham?
Here.
Councilmember Smith?
Present.
Commissioner Slavic?
Here.
Commissioner Gabe Randall?
Here.
Councilmember Bannister?
Here.
Commissioner Kellewart?
Here.
Commissioner Brown? Absent. And Commissioner Appel? No.
Not yet.
And you forgot me, but I'm here.
Oh, I added you and it didn't keep it. I'm sorry. Thank you.
We circulated the agenda ahead of time. There are a few printed copies if anybody in the audience would like to look at one. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. And we actually have three meetings worth of minutes to get to. First up, August 23rd. Any additions or corrections to the August 23rd minutes? Motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Was that?
I think it was Councilmember Smith, second by Commissioner Mursky.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
And then the minutes of December 6th. Any corrections to those? Motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And finally, January 24th. Any corrections to those? Fantastic. Motion to approve.
Move.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thanks. Next item up is our public commentary. Are there any members of the public who'd like to address the commission tonight? If you would, just come up to the podium here and state your name. No? Okay. There will be another opportunity at the end of the meeting if you're interested. We don't have any unfinished business, and our primary item of new business this evening is a facilitated goal-setting session for our work for the rest of the year. And Ms. Drennan is going to lead us in this process. In short, we're going to sort of talk about some broad topic areas and then gather some ideas for specific things within those topic areas that we might address, and then we'll all vote on both our priorities. So, Emma,
Sure.
please take it away.
Thank you, Chair Needham. I think the hope of this is that the commission is supposed to submit a work plan to council every year for its approval. I don't think it's happened recently, so this is a good chance to, I think it's a good opportunity for the commission to think about priorities as well as to meet that requirement. I would suggest that we try and be as specific as we can be and as realistic as we can be in terms of what the commission's able to take on. We have 10 meetings left in the year, commission meetings, and then one of them may be a metrics meeting or a meeting to discuss what's going to happen in 2020. So the number of meetings that the commission has to conduct business is limited. And I'll throw out one more sort of limitation is that council just passed a resolution that mandates that staff be at every subcommittee meeting. And there are staff limitations in terms of being able to be there to do minutes and to facilitate. So those are the sort of parameters that I'm hoping that folks are going to be okay working within. Does anybody else want to talk about sort of the goal for the evening?
Yeah, and sort of
Concerns or anything like
basically
that?
the broad topic areas are likely to translate into subcommittees is kind of how we're thinking. So just kind of keep that in mind as we go forward.
Okay. So over here, you all came up with some ideas before. So I just put that up there so that it isn't lost. Those are, Missy transcribed those. And then Chair Needham came up with several topic areas that you can see behind us. They're not meant to be, there's a couple pages that are blank, so if there's a topic area missing, I want to have that conversation now. So let's go through them real quick for folks that might not be able to see them. Solid waste issues, natural features, water quality, climate action, and a miscellaneous category. Are there any other broad categories that people feel like are missing that should go up there?
Commissioner Brown, in his email that he sent to everyone, did mention parks and open space as a topic area, but my sense is we should maybe stay away from that, given that there is a Parks Commission. Does anyone disagree with that?
And some of the things that he listed sort of fall under natural features.
Yeah, right.
Sure.
I can speak to that a little bit more. I think what we're looking at is issues of connectivity.
Right.
So there's a lot of overlapping spheres. One of the things that we're often missing when we come and meet to discuss natural features is how we encourage connectivity to be able to try to get more out of the park system that we have, out of the transportation system that we have that is in those parks. There's not a real great way right now to be able to do that. So, with that said, the caveat that I always worry about when we get into discussion and put up one, one board that says natural features is that we start to box in this thinking. So I would encourage all of us as we think about that, how we link some of these things together to be able to try to figure out how we get the best outcome.
Yeah.
Classic example, trees versus solar panels. Two great
Not
things.
versus. Not versus.
Thanks.
Well said.
I have a question as the energy liaison about the climate action topic, and I think it deserves to be on the board, but what I would ask is that people think about what it is that the Environmental Commission would do that adds to or collaborates with what the Energy Commission is doing and does not make it entirely redundant. So what kinds of things fall under climate action? I mean, certainly some of solid waste does, in the sense that we're reducing methane gases from landfill emissions. But under climate action, if people are adding things or Post-its, what would that be different than the kinds of things that I've been talking about that the Energy Commission is working on? And if there's additional clarification necessary, I could mention that.
Excellent.
Can I just ask for clarification about, maybe it was said but I missed it, where these headings came from? Is that,
These are kind of thought starters that just seem
Okay.
natural to me and Dr. Stoltz and Ms. Drennan.
Okay.
You know, these are topics that have come up before, and, I mean, we have had a natural features subcommittee in the past, so.
I guess what I was wondering about as we got ready for this meeting was, how much do we want to work directly from some of the things that have been presented to us already, like the sustainability plan, what's in the dashboard? I'm a new member, but it seems like we've got a lot of existing kind of frames already, and perhaps there's alignment, but I'm not certain.
Right, well, I mean, I think what we're trying to do tonight is to set some priorities for which of those things we want to make our highest priorities, and what makes the most sense to set up in a subcommittee format, which,
Finish.
that was pretty much it.
Okay. Just to pick up on that, the sustainability framework, I sort of agree with John, is sort of, at least sort of a starting point.
Yeah.
And there are 7 goals within the framework. And, for example, clean air isn't here at all. And I don't know if that should be there. I mean, and there may be others that at least people should consider, potentially. And I don't know if there was pre-discussion between the two of you and Missy that says we don't even want to consider all 7. We would really only like to focus in on these 4 and whittle these down to 2. So,
No, like I said, these are intended as thought
Right.
starters, and we certainly weren't intending to limit anything. I guess I might suggest that if we did want to add clean air, it might go with climate action rather than as a separate thing.
Could.
But, we could put clean air up there.
Yeah.
Bob? You know, if I might make a suggestion, we have 10 meetings left. Some of this is trying to prioritize what we're going to tackle at each meeting. So, you know, obviously we have 2 meetings that will deal with the solid waste plan. So that's a pretty big priority of this group and has been and will continue to be. I could anticipate even a third meeting dealing specifically with the MRF and recycling. You know, all of a sudden you're down to 7 meetings, and, you know, what subcommittees could meet and work on in that group. And then I look at some of the things, and what Steve sent was really good at getting the brain going. I mean, the Energy Commission can tackle one of the things that we've talked about here a lot, which is coming up with that energy efficiency program and all of that. So that takes that really off our plate as a focus of a meeting. I think, you know, some of what we can focus on in terms of air and water quality are, you know, we will undoubtedly continue to talk about PFAS and Gelman and potentially a few other sites within the city. And then as I look at some other things that he threw out there, you know, maybe we can prioritize in the natural features, you know, what we need to drill down on, because I know council's going to want to hear from this body on, hey, what do we do about the deer management program? Because we're coming up on the 4th year, and we're going to want some advice on how do we go forward with this. Should we go forward with it? Should we expand it? Should we make it smaller? What do we do? And I think that as a council person, I would like to hear this body's recommendation on that.
Oh, good. Thank you. Glad to have that conversation here.
It'll be exciting. Okay, so are there other broad categories besides clean air that people want to see reflected on the pieces of paper behind us as a topic area? No? Okay, fantastic. So John, you had mentioned the sustainability framework. Did you want to?
I could read them off and people could see if they resonate and
Sure.
just list them off. So one is sustainable systems, and I don't have the verbiage that follows that, but there are currently 2 indicators that are on the dashboard. One is tree condition and the other is impervious surface. So that has, some of that ties obviously then to natural features, but impervious surface doesn't really tie to any specific activity here, I don't think. Maybe water quality a little bit. The next one is transportation options. We have a transportation committee, and probably those are handled to some degrees there. One is, the indicators is percent non-motorized commutes, and the other, again, some of these haven't necessarily been tracked very well, but the other one is just a national citizen survey measure called overall use or overall ease of travel. So that may be something we leave out. The next goal relative to the Environmental Commission was integrated land use, and that's also a national citizen survey metric related to land use planning and zoning, and the other one is the overall built environment. I believe that might also be an NCS measure. The 4th is local food, and we really don't have a very good measure there that we didn't come up with them when the subcommittee was meeting. And one of them is SNAP and EBT purchases at the farmer's market. So that's really not probably a very good indicator of how many people in total are buying and using local food. And then the second under that is greenbelt land preserved. which may be something that we consider possibly under natural features. I don't know, that would be something that group would have to determine. The fifth was clean air and water, and there's 3 metrics there. Actually, one is not defined, but I'll mention it. The first is days of unhealthy air quality. The second is green infrastructure. The third is, again, not a very good measure in my view, and probably belongs more under energy. Number of EV charging stations. The sixth is healthy ecosystems with 2 metrics, tree canopy and watershed health. So clean water potentially, although that's really looking at the watershed health and not so much looking at what I think this is, and this is more drinking water quality. But I don't know if that was what was intended here or not. And then the last one was responsible resource use, where one of the metrics is % waste diverted, which really ties then to solid waste. And another one metric there is also solid waste related, also an NCS survey question related to recycling collection. So those are that's what's currently in the framework and in the dashboard.
Well, the first thing that I'm curious about is how folks feel about maybe taking the word quality off of water and just have it be water in general. That would get to the stormwater and creek shed
True.
health. Does that sound like something that folks are agreeable to? Okay. And then I guess, following up with what John was able to share with us, did anything else resonate with folks that would rise to the level of a topic that you'd be interested in having us discuss tonight? John?
Again, curious as a relatively new person, whether there should be something about the dashboard and indicators, or if that's something that's going to be contained in all of these, or if we should really focus on that as its own category.
Well, I would like it to be integrated personally. I mean, I think we do, I think Commissioner Mirsky's absolutely right that we need to be paying more attention to all these things, but I think that, you know, we can, each subcommittee can do that as they take things up. That's kind of how I'd like to see it, and we may do a once-a-year meeting of really digging into the nitty-gritty. That could be worthwhile.
Yeah.
And I'm prepared to say a lot about natural features when you're ready.
Okay. Allison? Sorry.
I'm sorry, what are we doing?
Oh, I thought you wanted to talk.
No.
Okay. Councilmember?
So I have a kind of question about metrics. John, as you were going through a lot of that, a lot of the metrics that we're using to measure our progress on these things is the National Community Survey data, which is pretty nebulous and in my mind pretty worthless for gauging real progress on this.
I agree.
I mean, I would, you know, Emily, you had mentioned that potentially one of our meetings will be about metrics. I think one of the big priorities that we should set this year is to come up with quantitative ways to evaluate the progress that we're making here. You know, that's way above my pay grade to figure that one out, but you guys are all really smart and talented, and I know you guys can help us do this. But I think ultimately, that's what we need to be able to tie things to. And I know some of these things are hard to quantify, that we don't have data to quantify a lot of these things, but the more that we can put the evaluation as a strictly quantitative process, I think it makes it easier for everybody to understand and to make assessments as to whether we're making sufficient progress.
One of the things that we worked on this summer with the metrics committee is we did go through the sustainability framework, and we did identify which metrics we were currently using that we thought were useful measures and which ones we could measure differently, and some of those indicators came from STAR. So I feel like we did a lot of that work already, and that I would also advocate that we stay with the sustainability framework because it's a standardized thing, and it's a way that we can compare how we're doing with other parts of the city rather than inventing our own thing. And if we do that, you know, we've done a lot of that background work already, and I think that we could roll that together pretty easily.
Perfect. See, that was exactly the answer I was looking for.
Okay. How do other folks feel about putting, there were 2 folks that were interested in having metrics up there. Councilmember Smith, how do you still feel like you'd like to have it up there?
I think that if you know, the work that was done last summer by the subcommittee can be incorporated into, you know, as we have these topics to introduce, this is how we're going to measure these things. I think that that's probably sufficient to build it into the way we do business. You know, I think, you know, I took to heart the email that John sent, that every working meeting that we have, we consider, you know, how we report where we are on these things. And I think the more that we do that, the better and more effective we will be. So I'm okay leaving it off of there, as long as, you know, we move forward with the thinking that we have to build these figures into what we're doing.
Okay.
If I may comment, I have no problem with the subcommittees that are really focused on a topic, thinking about the work that was done in the joint subcommittee and looking at that, and then evaluating whether those indicators are indeed good indicators, or if there's something better. And in some cases, we came up with, let's say, ideas, but not really a final recommendation. There are things, one or more choices from STAR that looked good, but we also said, well, maybe there's even something better than that. And so I think doing those in the subcommittees that are really focused on that topic area makes a lot of sense. And in the end, I think, to what Councilman Smith said, what we really want to do is in the end say that over the last year or over the last 5 years in working on X, we delivered these better outcomes for the residents of Ann Arbor. That there was a measurable improvement in whatever the group comes up with, whether it's tree canopy or whether it's water quality as measured by PFAS or whatever it is. And we just didn't say, well, we introduced 15 resolutions and passed them, and they went up to the state in Lansing, and we don't have any measurable improvement, say, for example, as we have had with diversion rate for 5 years. Diversion rate for solid waste has stayed flat for 5 years. We shouldn't be proud of that. None of us should be. And I don't mean just this group. I mean all stakeholders working in that area.
One last thing that I'd like to add to what John was saying and the work that we did before is that we also identified that the city was not necessarily the source of all the most relevant data, that Walk Score could be a really useful indicator for ease of transportation, and the Huron River Watershed Council might have more data about watershed quality, and that we should be open and pursuing those kinds of partnerships, again, so we're not doing redundant work, and that we have the best information.
Okay, fantastic.
So no separate metrics.
It sounds like no
Yes.
separate metrics.
I
Okay.
think that's the conclusion.
So this is the fun part where you get to think of brainstorm, and you should have everybody up here should have a set of sticky notes. Does anybody need any? No? So this is the large yellow ones. We're gonna do different things with the other sticky notes. So I wanna take, we'll see maybe like 5 minutes, and if you can write up as many important, specific projects that you think that these sections should work on, go ahead and do that. And then you'll just write them down on your sticky note and put them in their area. And then what we're gonna do after that is we're gonna vote on both the topic areas as well as specific projects. And if you are able to, if you wanna be part of it, and can I borrow this for a
Yes, of
second? Use the small thing and write your name next to it. And if you are willing to chair, just write chair or something like that. So we want to gauge both the sense of the topics, the specific project ideas, as well as, and then we'll get into voting. So let's, yeah?
One idea per note.
One idea per note.
Okay, with our name, and if we're willing to chair, and if we're willing to be on the subcommittee, are those the?
Yeah,
Or just-
so the idea on the yellow one,
Okay.
and then your name, and like whether you'd be on the committee or chair on the smaller one.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yep.
So let's take some time and do that.
Yeah.
deal too.
I won't know what to do when it's where it should be.
Yeah.
So just a time check, how are folks doing? Do we need a couple more minutes? I think you're still writing.
I am still waiting too. I'm
Okay.
almost done though.
We'll do a couple more minutes.
Feel free to scroll through anything.
Thanks.
It's a good idea, I think. This is moving pretty quickly, so I think we have time to do that.
Should I make that as an idea?
Here, you want to do it as a topic? Public outreach or?
It kind of folds into it like metrics does. I'm just not sure how to record that as a.
Maybe under
We did,
miscellaneous?
yeah, we did have a
Okay.
miscellaneous,
Okay.
kind of for that type of thing, yeah.
Does anybody need any more time to come up with topics? Okay, so for the purposes of making sure that folks in the audience can hear as well, or see the ideas as well as folks at home, I'm gonna go and I'm just gonna briefly read off, and I don't even know if the microphone's gonna catch it, but that way at least folks in the audience can hear what's up here.
Yep.
So in solid waste, we have MRF and recycling, compost collection expansion, expand organics collection year-round residential and business, solid waste, increased diversion, organics and recycling, MRF or other processing solution, get a fully functional MRF, work with Recycle Ann Arbor to update the recycling guide in a prominent place on the city website, hire a solid waste manager, reconsider the value of single stream recycling, zero organic waste by 2020 something, Sustainable solid waste management by implementing a pay-as-you-throw program. Educate residents on reduce, reuse, recycle, consume less products with packaging. Pay-as-you-throw or other incentive to reduce waste and increase recycling and reuse. Construction and demolition waste recycling, is that correct? Okay. Recycling collection, range of materials, diversion rate. Produce zero waste and optimize the use of, reuse of resources in our community. And as I'm standing here, I'm realizing that a lot of these are similar, so let's group them so that if folks are voting, that there's one big solid chunk. So I'm gonna take MRF and recycling, and I'm gonna put get a fully functional MRF all together. Does that sound okay to folks? And there's
Zero waste.
zero
There's
waste.
a couple of them.
Okay, so we can do a zero waste one.
Pay-as-you-throw, there are two of those.
Yeah.
Yep. That's different. Okay, so pay-as-you-throw can go over here. Where was the other
I think it was
pay-as-you-throw?
to your right hand, sort of in the middle, right there.
Yep, there we
That it?
go.
Yep.
So construction, recycling collection, so this is range of materials, diversion rate. Increased diversion rate in organics.
Yeah, there were a couple of organics.
I'm gonna just put this close to the organics. Compost collection expansion, also
It's organics,
organics.
Yep.
So this is a recycling thing, organics collection, more organics. Single stream. And somebody said there was another zero waste one.
Yeah, it's right at the bottom there with the green.
This one? Is that yours?
It is.
Okay, fantastic. All right. And then there's an education one, and hiring a solid waste manager, and reconsider the value of single stream recycling. Does that seem like a good collection of things? Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah,
Do we want to go down everything and then come back? Or do we want to sort of focus on a topic and then move, and then maybe make a decision or not, and then move on? I don't know if it's better to consider a topic sort of from top to bottom, or if it's better to get an overview and then come back and say, okay, now that we have an overview, what do we want to do? Is there a sense?
I think you want us to vote, right?
I do.
Oh,
So,
uh-huh.
so the overview.
Okay, overview. Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Okay. Natural features, comprehensive, something ordinance, natural features ordinance?
Yeah.
Okay. Inventory and put a value updated for 2019 and beyond of trees, be much more cautious removing trees. Hire, is it coordinator,
Are you reading mine?
part of outreach team? Does this sound
Yeah.
familiar for somebody?
Yep, hire a coordinator.
Hire a coordinator, okay?
And he would be part of an outreach team.
Is this one also yours?
Yeah,
Is that you saying you're gonna chair?
I am. the chair.
Awesome. Okay,
And you probably need help with that too.
I do, please.
Sorry, I didn't realize we were reading. So, a natural features inventory, wetlands, native forest fragments, other forest types, percent of tree canopy located with polygons in the GIS system, and polygons for non-recreational turf grass in the city. So we have an understanding of more or less the other impervious surface. And to hook it with a GIS system. And to do that with, as part of a team that begins to address climate change by managing and stewarding our natural features.
Thank you so much. Natural features inventory baseline, I'm gonna put that with the inventory up here. Tree canopy and tree conditions,
That's inventory.
It's a part of an inventory
Inventory,
too, and
okay.
establishing baseline, yeah.
John, I think this might go on a different one. This is year-round organics
Oh, you're right.
collection.
That is,
Yeah.
I did the,
So we have yet another one for over here. Oh,
Yep.
that's organics.
thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, thank you. Natural features policy opportunities with Parks and Planning Department. planning and DRT. What's DRT?
The planning and development.
Perfect.
DVT.
So there was a policy one over here. Okay. Nature's transportation corridors for walking, biking. Heritage tree definition, different. Whose is this one?
That's mine. So, we have landmark trees, but, we've had some developments come through that have, attempted to take out some of our massive bur oaks that are, 5 feet across. And it's the same consequence if you take that out versus if you take out a 10-inch oak. And I think that it would be helpful to have a category of the ones that we really think are special, and that the consequences, higher stakes for that, to be able to discourage people from taking them out and to really try to work around it. So it's a very targeted, like, come up with a heritage tree definition and consequence, to be able to encourage, in fact, they can, possibility that they can stick around.
Fantastic, thank you.
Good idea.
Question to that, could that also be a part of the inventory where we differentiate
Absolutely.
between that? And then maybe, would that also then potentially be coupled with an ordinance that's focused on those special categories, sort of a combination of the two?
Yeah, and it would be obviously within the natural features, definitions. It's basically adding another definition with a different consequence than the landmark tree, which is, just a little, in my mind, a little coarse, where.
It was a struggle to get that when we started.
Yeah, exactly, I get it. I mean, and so it continually evolves, right?
It does.
Yeah,
Now it's code, and it wasn't for a long time.
that's right.
Great. And then the last one under natural features is revisit Greenbelt program to include local food production as a focus.
Very good.
So water issues.
Emily, sorry, Mike
Yeah,
has a
oh, I'm
question.
sorry.
I just wanted to mention, I was a little vague. In the parks, we keep getting offers for slivers of land from developments that, if they were more thoughtfully contributed, could become part of more connectivity. I think there needs to be some sort of a policy solution for this, and it's very challenging because you have to encourage people to be able to develop their lots differently. But we do that for all sorts of other things anyway. I'm just not sure how we come up with a solution for this spatial link across undeveloped sites. So how do you take a site that's nothing right now and be able to put it together with two other completely disparate things? So this is, it just feeds back to what Chris was saying in terms of a GIS system that helps to look at what we're considering natural features right now from a user's perspective, both as human users and also, wildlife and other things. And being able to try and put together some policies that help to steer us in that direction. Certainly this is very similar to what you're saying with these heritage trees, because they are such important pieces of the landscape already. How we begin to put this together, and also with a transportation layer over the top of that, so these cut-throughs that kids use to be able to get from one neighborhood to the other actually can start to turn into more of our transportation corridor and network at the same time too. Like I say, these are pretty amorphous thoughts right now, but this is the place where these various people come together that think about these things to be able to try and make this happen on the ground and over time.
Great. Would you like to keep that by itself, or would you like to put it with the inventory, since you mentioned that?
I think it makes sense to go with the inventory, as long as folks can also consider what we would be trying to do with this in terms of policy solutions after, I
Okay.
guess.
Great. And then we have a last-minute addition, celebrate chimney swifts and protect their habitat in natural features.
Be good.
Any other comments on natural features before we move on to water?
Blackbird.
Okay. So recommend city actions to combat PFAS contamination, revisit stormwater regulations, dam Superior Barton, future of these dams, communications about whether to buy a home filter, digital signs by canoe liveries of today's water quality, measurable improvements in quality of Allen Creek watershed, Allen Creek goal to raise its score from Huron River Watershed Council's metric. So I'm going to put that with Allen Creek over here. Anybody need to clarify anything that they put up here? No? Okay. So climate action and clean air, weatherization of residences, emergency hubs and preparedness, energy efficiency to reduce emissions. I'm gonna put that with weatherization unless folks have a problem with that. Transportation options, work to have less idling in cars. Encourage clear sidewalks, neighborhood snow buddy style snow removal to encourage year-round biking and walking. Would that go with transportation options? Whose is this, or would you want it to be a standalone thing? The snow buddy?
It could fold under transportation.
Okay. Walkability, I'm gonna, if that's okay with folks, I'm gonna put that under transportation options as well. Okay? Encourage mixed-use development so people don't have to drive to the store. And explore green roof stormwater credit. Does anybody see anything else that should be lumped together? How do we feel about idling being by itself or with transportation? Do we have a strong feeling? No. Okay. I'm gonna leave it by itself. And then in our last category, the miscellaneous, pass new light ordinance to reduce light pollution in the city, and community and neighborhood engagement. Okay. So at this point, we're gonna do some voting. The blue, sorry to make this so complex, it shouldn't be this complex, but the blue ones are gonna be for the section, so the topic headers, the things at the top. You get 3 dots, so pick the 3 topic areas that you would like.
You know what, since we only have 4, maybe we should limit the choice to 2,
Yeah, okay, that sounds good.
because we're gonna have to go 2. ultimately.
So you have 3 dots, you're only allowed to use 2 according to the chair.
Okay.
And then on this, the yellow, green, and red, we're gonna do your first choice, your second choice, and your third choice. So your first choice is like a traffic signal. Green is your first choice, yellow is your second choice, red is your third choice. And those are gonna be for the specific project. So that's the ones on the bottom. And then your last task, because we're gonna do it all at the same time to confuse you, is to use your little thing and to write your name and on the committees that you'd be willing to be part of or chair.
So we're voting on what we think the commission priorities should be
Yeah.
with these red, green, and yellow, and we are assigning ourselves with our sticky notes, and we are supporting general areas with our blue.
Exactly.
Got it.
Clear as mud.
And the red, yellow, green, those can vary, they don't have to be all in the same top. or-
And you can put yourself in other people's
Yeah.
topics.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And are we treating one whole sheet as the subcommittee?
Yes. So the blue dots will go either solid waste, natural features, water, climate action and clean air, or I don't think anybody's gonna put a blue dot on miscellaneous, and you get 2 of those.
Prioritizing.
Yep. So is that clear? Okay. Let's take some time and do that. We'll check back in.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
The big
I'm
picture.
sorry.
I should have spoken up, some of these things are happening now.
It sounded good in my head when I was
Yeah,
thinking
no,
about
this is
it.
fine,
No.
this is fine. We can talk about some of this later.
Yeah,
I mean,
no, we have time to.
Natural features and energy and climate change.
Okay.
So
Who's
you
gonna-
get a vote with my red.
Yeah, we all know where the big problem is.
This is not a sticky surface.
Nope.
down in the middle of the sheet.
Maybe something fell off.
Okay.
I'm just guessing.
That's an answer.
Almost gave you a hug there.
Sorry.
All right, anybody else need to vote with your sticky dots yet? Okay, let's go see if we can make some sense. Looking at the top topics, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for solid waste, 7 for natural features, 5 for water, 2 for climate action, and 1 for miscellaneous. I love that. We're gonna have a miscellaneous subcommittee.
All right, thanks.
And then taking a little bit more of a closer look, I'm seeing that there are quite a few dots for the MRF. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 4 of them are people's first priority, so that's impressive. 2 for pay-as-you-go, 4 for compost collection, and I'm seeing a whole bunch for natural features inventory. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for natural features inventory. A couple smattering of other things. 3 for Allen Creek, including 2 number 1 options. And then 3 for transportation options under climate action. Okay. So this is where it gets interesting. Anybody want to suggest what they're seeing up here in terms of priorities?
I have a comment more.
Yeah.
Just for information. I think it's okay to say this. RAA has already made a written general proposal to the city to activate or reuse or develop the MRF. So that's under already moving, and the subcommittee could potentially do some work, maybe potentially in support of that. I don't know to what degree there's action and to what degree we would be involved, but there's already some work that's being done in that area. So I think that's of general interest. Another one that I wanted to comment on, and it's under water quality and maybe related to Allen Creek a little bit, and that is, and Shannon's involved in this, there's already a group of people that have been meeting related to watershed health and the score that was developed as a part of the metrics, as an outgrowth of the metrics subcommittee. And a second meeting with city staff takes place next Tuesday, and there was a pre-meeting already with Huron Rivershed Watershed Council. They're participating in that, so there's already some activity related to that. And the other comment that I had is, could we talk about a joint subcommittee, say with transportation, on these transportation option ones? Or would this be just an exclusive, or energy, could be all three, that's a good point, as opposed to just exclusively something that the energy, or excuse me, the environmental commission would work on?
I think that's up to you all.
Okay,
and to
true.
what the other commissions would be interested in as well.
Right.
Councilmember?
John, I think, that's a really good suggestion. I mean, particularly with the transportation options, having a joint subcommittee with the Transportation Commission. Similarly, some of the natural features stuff, a joint with parks and potentially planning, so that all can, go back to all three places, for broader review and acceptance. The more that we can, cross-pollinate here, the better the outcomes will be. So I would want to encourage that cross-disciplinary discussion as part of our subcommittees. Just thinking about the way this breaks down into, all right, so we have 10 meetings. We've got, a lot of really awesome stuff. So what is our goal for each of those meetings? Is it to have the subcommittee present a set of recommendations? Is it to present an analysis of current conditions? Is it to do a little bit of both? Like, I think that's where I'm spinning my wheels a little bit. It's a lot easier to think about the solid waste stuff because we're going to have stuff to react to. We're going to be evaluating the draft solid waste plan, then providing a recommendation on the final solid waste plan to council. I think obviously we have a big role to play in whatever happens with the MRF and providing recommendations to council. But I think I view all of this stuff in the lens of what is our end product? What is the recommendation and advice being provided to council in each of these areas? And to think of them very specifically as, okay, so let's take, for example, the Allen Creek Watershed Health one. Like, is the outcome of that, here are some land use policies that we think council needs to adopt. Is it, we have locations we think that it's important to prioritize green infrastructure. To start thinking in terms of deliverable, and so that when each of these comes up, we only have, 10 meetings, 2 of which will be solid waste dominated, that we are producing something at that meeting instead of just having a presentation. Because I think when we just have a presentation, we're not very effective and we're not very engaged.
It seems like it would make sense to have the members of the subcommittee come up with the goals. Like, these are the things we think we can do, and they can use the existing metrics work, they can use the sustainability framework, and look at whatever resources are available and say, here's what we're going to do. And, it seems to me that we would either think about having updates from subcommittees like every other meeting, so we have regular progress reports, or we just really buckle down, and if there's something that one of the subcommittees really needs to address, that we all, lend our ideas to it.
And before the meeting, Chair Needham and I were talking, and you were saying that you were comfortable with if we didn't come out with specific projects, but that the subcommittees could make that determination and make a recommendation back to commission, which I think is similar to what you were saying. So I guess at this point, let's talk, anybody else want to jump in? Okay, so, yeah.
I would also like to advocate that we include a calendar on this, a timeline, when we expect certain things to be done, because otherwise, people get busy, things don't happen. But if we schedule these meetings, the subcommittee is reporting in June, that organizes the goals and the time.
Okay, so talking about which subcommittees to create at this point, I should have written down the numbers that they were, but it looks like the two that rise to the top are solid waste and natural features, with water coming in right behind it. So that would, if we were gonna restrict the number of subcommittees to two, given staff limitations and, as Councilmember Smith was talking about, your limitations in terms of volunteer time and the number of meetings, I would recommend that there be no more than two, but that's a discussion that you all should have probably now to decide that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dr. Stultz was pretty clear that two was all that we could expect staff support for, which is certainly understandable. I personally, I think if we have a solid waste and a natural features one, that makes sense to me. Those were the top vote getters. Water is close behind, but the number of things on the page is much lower. So there would presumably be fewer things for that committee to even take up. And one point I think that we should keep in mind too is, not everything's going to come through a subcommittee. We can take up something having to do with water, and any of us can bring it forward. So I'm comfortable with those two. I don't know what other people think, but.
Did you have something to say? If I may, then what I would offer as, for example, the transportation-related climate action activities. I think I've reported here that there is a group, and it's basically just called a working group, that's composed of people from planning and energy and other people, even frankly outside of even the city of Ann Arbor, that are working on a lighting ordinance. And I think that's what Bob was sort of getting at, is it doesn't prevent people that are passionate about those ideas for teaming up with people that are on transportation, that are in planning and whatever, and forming an informal working group and deciding we want to really do X and focus on X, just as we're drafting. We have basically a final draft of a lighting ordinance. And you could, and we chose to focus on that. We were planning on going on to right-of-way lighting and street lighting as a second step. But that could be done with any of these. So I'd just like to echo what you're saying, is that there's a precedent for that, and anybody can step forward anytime with a good idea.
And I am actually raising my hand this time. I just wanted to note that there's been a resource management team that was formed out of, when the climate action plan was being developed, that has been meeting regularly for years and years and years, with the Ecology Center folks and Recycle Ann Arbor, lots of other interested parties have been super engaged on this for a really long time, so they should probably be involved in a subcommittee if we can have outside people.
Can I get clarity about the staff thing? For your working group, does that have to have staff time?
It hasn't had.
If you take really good notes, does that count?
My understanding, and the council members can verify this, my understanding, as has been described to me, is that legislation was just passed by council that really specifically says that staff needs to be at every subcommittee meeting where business is being conducted, so that there are minutes, there's support there, that it's an official meeting. And this is a change from before, because we've had subcommittees meet without staff before. Does that sound like what you passed?
I wonder, was this when Chris Frost standardized the bylaws across all commissions?
Yeah, I don't remember this
This
being a
isn't ringing a bell.
specific direction from council.
'Cause this is a real limiting factor in our ability to
Yeah.
contribute.
Okay.
I would ask for clarification on this, because, this was not the main thrust of any deliberation we had about boards and commissions.
I
And
think
the
it came
intent
from
was
the
not
open
to-
meeting resolution that you passed,
Is that what-
possibly?
Can you clarify this for us at all?
Sorry, my computer shut down here. I'm trying to pull up our actions.
Unfortunately, I can't. I don't remember it, and if it was included in some detail, that definitely wasn't our intent.
Right.
At least it wasn't my intent.
Can I just speak to the lighting ordinance? What we did is we coordinated with head of planning. So we had a meeting with the planning commission and with Brett, and he knows what we're doing, and there's 2 people from planning commission that are meeting with us. So in a sense, the intent was fulfilled, and I would suggest maybe that's the kind of thing that we would want to do, is to make sure that what the general topic is and what it is, and that it would be supported by, at some point, the respective committee could potentially be enough.
And I think that we could make commitments to say, we're going to talk about the agenda, and we're going to give it to you ahead of time, so you can post it, so it follows with the public meetings.
I think the important thing is, and I know Councilmember Griswold just indicated, that wasn't her intention. These committees are supposed to do work, they're supposed to get stuff done. Like, that's the reason that we have them. To say you can't meet without staff, that handicaps their ability to actually produce anything.
Right.
And so I just can't imagine that was intentional. It was certainly not brought up that any of the 3 of us can remember.
I'll draft a resolution saying we should undo that.
Well, I really appreciate the clarification, because this is something that staff was confused about, so thanks for the clarification.
Or is there a way that, because we don't want to operate in a vacuum completely too, and so maybe there's a way to do it where it's like periodic rather than somebody's there taking notes all the time. But I do remember about a year and a half ago, somebody coming in front of Planning Commission saying that all meetings need to be open and recorded. And I remember thinking, wow, how much staff time would that take? And so I don't know if that was like that because of the Open Meetings Act or whatever, that was one of the kind of legal consequences of that. But I do remember somebody coming up and bringing that up at Planning Commission. It's a real balancing act, because boy, not a lot of work is gonna get done if you have to have a staff member taking notes all the
And you have
time.
other things to do than go to our meetings.
Right. Absolutely. You know what, I'm gonna get clarity on that just from Chris Frost, just to make sure that we were confused about that. So that does take off let's just say at this point that it sounds like that takes off the limitation of 2. So I'm gonna open it back up for you guys to talk about that at this point.
Thanks for looking into that.
Yeah, I will. So 2 to 3, is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, if we don't have that limitation, then it seems pretty clear that we've got 3 good options here to me.
Can we tentatively say 3, and if it turns out that
think
there's that staff issue, then we can roll back to 2?
How I'd like to do it, yeah.
Just to speak for maybe someone who's not here, Steve Brown, I know he has a personal interest also in water quality, and he's a chemist or some kind of chemical engineering background, so he's really interested and involved. So I would, if I can be so presumptuous as to speak for him, I think he would appreciate that, and I'm pretty sure that he would be willing to take a significant role in that as well.
Anybody not here can be the chair of one of the
Exactly.
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 Yeah?
As I look at these topics and as I think about what we're facing, solid waste may be a topic where we're not necessarily driving the bus at this point. We're able to sort of respond to the initiatives that are going together with Schwimp.
Active.
The
resource management plan.
regionalization
that too.
part. And we're probably all going to get updates on this as this goes. I just put that out there to think of forming a subcommittee around solid waste. While it might be nice to have some of us be the go-to people that are helping to get the information out to the rest of us, I wonder if we're not all going to get it already just as a result of hearing about how this process unfolds, at least for another 6 to 8 months, maybe.
I think that's true for the MRF, but if, say, somebody wants to explore organics collection, that committee could do some work and think about how that might be implemented, or a zero waste. There's smaller parts of that I think could be overseen by subcommittees.
Sure.
have a question for Commissioner Skinner. How, the task force that you were talking about, the resource management team, how would you see that interacting with a subcommittee? Or would it, are they parallel efforts? Could they work together? Or do you see it really being one or the other?
I mean, I guess it depends on what the defined goals of the subcommittee are. I haven't been as involved as I would like to be lately with that group, so there's been a lot happening that I'm not aware of. But I could see it being either, parallel or kind of a joint effort.
Okay, thank you.
I only know secondhand information about it. Steve's involved and he's going to all the meetings, so he would be a potential connection, and I think it would be good to talk to him and people from RAA as to whether or not they could be merged, or if they're parallel, or if there's a certain amount of overlap, but I think further discussion is warranted at least.
Could I make a suggestion that possibly you think about having a you have folks that are interested in a solid waste subcommittee, come meet, and then you can come back to the commission with a recommendation of what you would work on and how you would interact with the existing groups? Does that sound like a proposal that would meet everybody's needs? Okay.
I think that makes sense.
Do we have anybody who would be interested in serving as a chair of the solid waste subcommittee as it is thought of now,
Other than Steve.
other than Steve? It could be Steve. If we don't have anybody who's willing to step forward, that's fine.
I was gonna
He's-
say, why other than Steve?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not here, so,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know, I
He's
nominate
He's the
Steve.
chair.
He might, actually, he might
really
be a
want
good
to
candidate,
do
to
that,
be
yeah,
honest with you.
so.
Okay.
He's on the advisory, the Solid Waste Resource Management Plan Advisory Committee too, and he's been going to all those meetings, so he would be a good candidate.
Yeah,
I mean, we can all have unanimous consent on this. if we-
Great. And who would be interested in being on that committee? I want to capture that for moving forward. If you could just raise your hand if you'd want to be on it. Okay.
Okay. No, I'm not gonna give you that.
Taking you off?
Well, I don't want us all to be clustered on the same committee. I mean, put me on and
Okay.
we'll see how it goes out.
So who else had their hands up? I saw Councilmember Smith. Yeah? Okay. So okay, anybody else? Okay, great. So, natural features, is anybody willing to be chair?
I think Commissioner Graham has been, and
I won't give it up.
there you go.
Okay, and who else would be interested in serving on the natural features subcommittee? Okay. Anybody else down there? No? So we have Commissioner Graham serving as the chair. We have Councilmember Bannister, Commissioner Mursky, and Commissioner Appel. Is that correct? Okay. And then water, water issues.
I have a question, if I may,
Yeah.
what comes to mind. There's no problem in recruiting resident or other people to these committees. I think, Chris, you've already mentioned you have some people in mind for that, right?
A lot of people.
Yeah, so we're not limited to,
No, our bylaws specifically
Right,
state that
that's
we
what I
can go
thought, yeah,
outside the
yeah.
commission, yeah.
and we should actively pursue that, yeah.
Good comment, thank you. So for water, is anybody interested in chairing a water subcommittee? And I would recommend that maybe Steve not chair both.
Yeah.
Who else is in here?
Okay, if we don't have a chair, that makes it hard to,
Well, I would be willing to chair it. I don't know very much about Allen Creek. That's my reticence about that.
I could spot you there. I just can't do planning commission 3 times a month
I
and
know,
chair.
I understand. I gotcha.
So,
So I would do that.
fantastic. And who else would be interested in serving? So I've got. You'd be on it, okay. questions? Okay. Okay. So, we have 3 subcommittees. We will come back with some information about the staff thing. It sounds like that's not going to be a limiting factor. We have chairs and we have folks that are interested in serving. Chair Needham and I and Dr. Stoltz will get together and we will figure out an action plan of how to move forward
Right.
and recommend it to folks over email. Does that sound?
Sure, and then I think we'll develop an actual written work plan out of this that we can bring forward, hopefully for next time. I don't know how detailed it will be, but it will at least set up the subcommittees and give us something that we can forward to council.
Okay. And then we would want, just to reiterate, we would want the subcommittees to meet to talk about their specific projects that they would bring back to the commission. Is that correct?
I think so. Do we have to wait until you send us the proposal before we meet?
No.
Okay.
I think a good first step might be the chairs meeting with Missy and you and I.
Sure.
Those groups and get some direction.
Okay.
Set up some next steps that way. Does that make sense?
I can set that meeting up, and we can do it, the people can phone into if they need to. So thank you so much for going with this process. I really appreciate it. And
Thank
all
you
the
for-
sticky notes and all the dots.
Thank you for guiding us through it. That
Yeah.
was great. Really appreciate that. Back to the rest of the agenda, and one more item of new business being brought to us, I believe, by Councilmember Smith, involving proposed ordinance to amend city code to, I think, prohibit two-stroke engines is the short version, right?
Yes, not citywide, it's, considered kind of a pilot for the downtown district. This actually comes to us via Councilmember Ramlawi, who has discussed this at the DDA Partnerships Committee, and took it through the legal review, and I suggested that we take a look at it. It's pretty simple, let's prohibit the use of two-cycle, outdoor power equipment downtown. It's noisy, it's bad for the air quality. Let's see how that works. The discussion, the outreach, the major property owner downtown that does maintenance is First Martin. They have no objection, at least as communicated to me by Councilmember Ramlawi. I think that this is the type of thing that generally comes out of this commission as a policy directive like this, and I think because it's just confined to the downtown district, it's a suitable pilot that we can look at, broader citywide. And I do bring that up simply in the discussion of looking at what Mr. Brown had sent us regarding some of his priorities, where, looking at prohibiting two-stroke engines citywide was one of his ideas, as well as, prohibiting charcoal lighter fluid sales. And I think this is the first step to see how this works. So if this goes forward with our blessing, Councilmember Bannister and I would introduce this at council and take that through the ordinance amendment process.
So are you looking for a formal resolution of support
Yes.
tonight? Okay.
And I had one question on that. I remember when Councilmember Ramlawi told me about this, he said that at the time the Parks Commission was looking at whether they too would then get rid of all of theirs, and so I don't know if Commissioner Apple was part of any of those discussions about how much it would cost to replace that equipment, or if we have if anyone has heard anything about the price to replace the equipment.
It's hand labor.
Commissioner Gibrandel?
Excuse my ignorance, but what is a two-stroke engine?
I don't know that
I can-
that articulate about it.
I can explain it, I think. So, most engines, the piston riding inside the cylinder there are 4 strokes per cycle. So basically, the piston is moving up and down 4 times with air take going in, and then compression, and then spark, and then it going down, and then going back up. And in a 2-stroke engine, it's only 2 strokes per cycle, and though the combustion in those is not as complete, you also have to add oil to the gasoline, which causes then a lot more particulate matter and a lot more other bad exhaust elements. And typically, in the past, 4-stroke engines were bigger and heavier, and that's why a lot of portable motor-driven internal combustion type engines, whether they're weed whackers or whatever, were 2-stroke. And now with battery-operated equipment, with lithium-ion batteries, that replaces the need, in most cases, for small, lightweight 2-stroke engines. They also make a lot of 4-stroke engines now. They're a little bit more expensive to make, but they burn a lot cleaner. As Councilmember Smith said, that's basically the rationale behind those. It's a good question.
Commissioner Gibrand?
I see a lot of utility of this in trying it in the downtown. There's not a whole lot of lawn downtown. So really, it seems to me about being a leaf blower situation, because the DDA, I mean, there's a few areas where there's a little bit of lawn between the sidewalk and the road, but there's really not much. So I guess it's like a baby step, which is important. But I would say, like, what about city facilities? People that we hire, the people that you know, you can't get on the rider mower or whatever, that doesn't, I mean, that just seems like we would actually have an impact on air quality in a way that, I mean, so it doesn't have to be like citywide right away, and maybe that's like the next phase 2 or something, but there's a lot more lawn that city facilities have outside of the downtown where you could really actually do something about this. So I'm in support of this, but I feel like it's a pretty tiny first step. So I'm not like, you know, ready to change the wording and say, oh, let's take out, you know, but I would like to set our sights higher, because I think that we really can with this, and have the city kind of be the test pilot on, well, what does it cost? You know, because then if you feel it yourself, if the city feels it themselves, and they have a sense of kind of what it means for citizens too. I mean, I'm all for it, but I would like to make sure that this is like the first little step that we take out of greater steps to come that aren't that far away, I guess is what I would say.
So we don't actually have a formal resolution text in front of us, but just very simply, I think the question would be resolved that the Environmental Commission urges the City Council to amend Title VI of the Ann Arbor City Code by adding Chapter 73 as detailed in our agenda. Do we have a motion to that effect?
Yes.
Second? Any further discussion? Commissioner Graham?
Well, here I am as a landscape contractor, talking back to you. I thought perhaps we'd get somewhere down the road citywide with an hourly limitation on when these machines could be used. Lawnmowers are 4-stroke, it's not an issue. The issue is leaf blowers, spin trimmers, some snow blowers, chainsaws.
There's still plenty of lawnmowers that are 2-stroke too. Maybe not new ones, but there's plenty of people that use 2-stroke lawnmowers out there.
Not commercial guys.
Not commercial, but your average homeowner probably has a 2-stroke.
So
I would say.
many would. And I don't object to downtown. I don't think most spaces are, besides that battery-powered ones would be a problem. I don't know about park spaces, and I think you may get some serious feedback from those guys about the cost of changing to battery. I haven't seen any 4-stroke leaf blowers. They would probably be very heavy, although I think John's right, they're getting better. But I haven't seen any on the market that have gotten me excited. I would ask your parks people how they feel. before you work on the downtown. And if you want to ask them about the broader parks question, then I think the economics really become important. And insofar as the broad landscape in the city, there will be quite a hue and cry from the contractors. That doesn't mean we shouldn't push them, and I shouldn't push myself around about it, but not instantly, please. Thank you.
I guess I don't know that I've ever even seen a city worker with a leaf blower before, because I think really that's more in the private sector, that everyone wants all their leaves blown off and into the street, and that goes straight into our storm sewer, and that has implications for other things. And so I think it's really a private industry issue, not, and like a neatness thing for business owners and residents. And, you know, I don't ever think I've seen the city leaf blowing in their parks. I see them mowing, but I don't know. Perhaps Commissioner Apple could fill us in on that activity.
Here's a couple of clever observations from the front line. The leaf blowers that I use, I have 2 of them in my business. They are powered by a gas oil mix, but they are technically 4-stroke engines. So I'd say, first off, I guess the question is, what are we trying to regulate with this particular ordinance? Because I think Shannon's point was pretty well taken. There are not that many of these sort of 2-stroke pieces. They're still in people's garages. They may be sold as the $100 mower that you can get from the big box store. But I don't think that they're being used that regularly by commercial folks, and probably very, very rarely downtown. So that's one thing. If we're trying to regulate, as somebody who needs to use a blower as part of the work that I do, this wouldn't affect me according to the way that it's written, because all of my equipment, the modern equipment that I have, is a 4-stroke engine. The other part of this that concerns me is how much of this ends up being on the backs of the worker, if you will. These are labor-saving devices that help get a lot of work done. Are we sort of mandating that we return to a broom and a dustpan downtown? And if we are, we should be explicit about that. I often see blowers used incorrectly. We use them all the time to clean up a site. When we blow dust and debris, we clean it up. We sweep it up, and it goes into the compost. Right. They can be used effectively as a way to be able to make a site look good, and as a way to be able to save hours and hours of labor in terms of tidying up a site when somebody's done with work. So those are my thoughts for right now. First of all, I guess I would ask what we are trying to regulate with passing this. Passing a 2-cycle power equipment ordinance for the DDA may turn off 1 or 2 mowers in this square mile, but I don't think it's going to do very much for air quality as a whole in the city. And I'm not sure that passing an ordinance that's not necessarily worded to be able to take care of a problem that we're trying to address would be that effective. So please, more thoughts.
So I think I can talk a little bit more to the intent that Councilmember Ramlawi has in introducing this, and it is directly pertains to leaf blowers. A lot of the maintenance crews downtown, whether they are employed by the DDA or by some of the property owners, use the blower simply to blow garbage off the sidewalk into the street. It is, it's loud, it's dirty. It blows stuff into our storm drains that we don't want into our storm drains.
You dust up a lot of pollen as well.
So his intention is to, we can find other ways to clean our sidewalks that are more effective and impact people's lives in a much less negative way.
In my view, the noise has been the issue in the residential neighborhoods. lot of people really object to the leaf blower noise. Chainsaw noise too, for that matter, but that's a bit more necessary.
Isn't it not allowed on Sundays too?
I wish it weren't, but it's not.
It is.
Really? I thought that was a,
Our noise ordinance doesn't apply there, and it should. For lawnmowers too. I mean, a lot of people get out there at Sunday night at 6 o'clock to mow the lawn, which is kind of obnoxious. And normally not the commercial guys, it's homeowners.
Just two brief points. First of all, the proper, and everybody's been using it here, but it's the improper term in the draft, and it is a two-stroke engine, not a two-cycle engine. So that should be corrected everywhere. My thinking is that if something like this were done, to address some of the concerns that were expressed here, there could be a phase-in period. And I'm not an expert in this, but I did work in my company's power tool division for a while. And I think electric power tools, like I said, you know, there's the new lithium-ion battery packs, and they're not that new anymore, frankly, are really, really effective. You can have, you know, you can buy 10 of them and put them on your truck, and they can use that, and that addresses a lot of the issues that we've been talking about here in terms of air quality. You still get the blowing noise, but you don't get the engine noise in the background. And I would encourage people that are looking at this to consider whether or not if you really want to address it, maybe moving as a pilot downtown to battery-driven tools, and then that would be introduced, you know, in the midterm to also just battery-driven tools citywide potentially.
So I have no objection if we also just want to postpone action on this, and we can go back to Member Ramlawi with some recommended changes, because it all has to ultimately go back through the attorney's office before we act on it. And I don't think that I have any concern about that. I don't know, Councilmember Bannister, do you have any concern about it?
No, that sounds good, and to address battery-driven tools citywide, including parks and...
And that could be a second phase. I mean, I think I like the idea that several people have mentioned here. It's questionable how good of a pilot this is because it's so limited, but at least doing a pilot, you know, in an area and also have a phase-in period, then people can plan for it.
And I guess I wouldn't, I don't see any problem with putting in the goals of what we are trying to do here.
That's a good point.
If we're trying to keep litter out of the curb and gutter and out of the stormwater, then why don't we put that in there?
Agreed.
You know, there are, as a professional, I am always frustrated when I see people using these tools improperly, because it's one less, you know, it's one less vote against the technology for me being able to use it properly.
Yes.
So yeah, I think this is a great opportunity to be able to educate people yet again about what that little metal box in the gutter is and where it goes.
So if the issue is stuff going in the gutter, removing blowers entirely from the picture is still going to get brooms pushing it into the gutter, or not very good housekeeping at all.
I think it's both things, though. I mean, it's the air quality piece, you know, the noise is a nice thing to take care of, too. And I think that, you know, the offshoot of what this isn't addressing specifically is that, you know, I regularly see them blowing it all into the street, and, you know, it all ends up in our creeks, so.
So I also see guys who mow and blow the clippings into the street, and half of them leave them, and the other half get their leaf blowers out and blow them back up on the grass, which ought to happen.
Right. But air quality is definitely, I mean, I think that's where it was coming from. And
Getting better with even this two-stroke ones than 10 years ago. Way better.
I think there is still a challenge with dust, however. I mean, I think that the air quality issue with these blowers is not just the result of the engines themselves,
Yep.
but the fact that, you know, when somebody's using them, there is a big cloud of dust that's created.
And the same with lawnmowers on those kinds of days.
Yeah.
Councilmember Bannister.
A tangential issue to this is, I haven't heard complaints this winter, but last winter I heard a lot of concerns about blue bristles falling off the snow bobcats that were working in the DDA, and I saw them, you know, big chunks of bristles littered around that were then going into the storm drain also.
They would have been plastic.
What?
They're plastic.
Plastic, big blue plastic bristles.
They're not-
And
they're
they're typically glass fiber reinforced as well, so you're introducing the plastic and the glass fiber reinforced stuff all into the river basin.
So, Councilmember Smith, this was your motion. Are you comfortable postponing indefinitely for? Okay. Well, that takes care of our new business then. On to reports. Do we have a report from the Energy Commission?
So I've talked before about the various subcommittees, and I've already mentioned the lighting ordinance and what's going on there. Just as a reminder, we're working on 100% clean and renewable projects, and we've assigned people to work on specific subgroups within the subcommittee. A group of people is going to be working on solar installations on city property. Another group is working on using the methane that we're currently selling to a third party that's coming from the landfill and using that at Wheeler. It looks like the savings could be substantial, although there will be some one-time implementation costs. And then also looking at hydro on at least one additional dam and possibly upgrading the hydro on the 2 existing dams. And then possibly energy storage, where the benefit of that would be reducing our peak demand, and the utility rates that we pay are somewhat determined by what the peak demand is. So if you can lower your peak demand, then you pay an overall lower cost. Then there's an EV ready ordinance committee, which is really going to do more than just look at EV readiness. So EV readiness is basically one which would target new infrastructure going in, any new major development or major renovation of a project. I can't remember what the threshold is, 30% or something like that of the value of the property would require that the property be sized, or excuse me, electrical equipment and conduit would be sized so that it would be ready for putting EV chargers in. And there's various levels of doing that, and we're looking at other ordinances. Some of them require that you just make the electrical box and the conduit big enough. Some require that you run all of the wire and everything and do that. And so we have to decide to what level we want to be EV ready. There's some other interest in looking in that same group, so it would go beyond just that ordinance. We've had some communication, and we'll talk next week in the meeting about looking at buses. Some of you may have read the article in the Observer where AAATA is replacing some of its hybrid buses with what they call clean diesel buses, although that myth has been somewhat busted in the last couple of years now. And so we're wondering if we can do something, get AAATA, Ann Arbor Public Schools, and the University of Michigan to maybe work collaboratively to do something with electric buses, maybe even just a pilot. Apparently, Ann Arbor Public Schools is furthest along in doing that. And then the last committee that's really active is this home energy score, which was basically an audit of the energy efficiency of a home that also determines with that an estimated energy cost of what it would cost to heat and to pay for all the electricity of a home at the time of, that would be required at the time of market. And there are a couple of ordinances in the country that do that already: Portland, Oregon, Austin, Texas. I think there's a third one. And so we have a couple of those drafts, and a couple of us this morning actually went through a home energy score audit to get an idea of what that would entail. And we talked with the gentleman who potentially could train auditors here in the city. The only other thing from the Energy Commission is that there was a first reading of a resolution that was drafted by a concerned resident that then I took to the floor, which would prohibit regulated utilities from making donations to 5014Cs, I think I have the termination, pardon me?
C4.
C4s, thank you. C4s, which is basically what you've heard about dark money, where they can essentially make donations to these groups that then run ads or things like that against whatever it might be, an increase in the renewable portfolio standard or whatever. In one of the things that precipitated that is that Consumers Ed was punished by the MPSC because of some dark money contributions that they made to influence some elections, and so they're prohibited from doing that for the rest of this year. And our thinking is, why should that happen anytime? That doesn't prohibit them from making a donation, but it has to be clear that it's coming from this entity, it was this amount of money, and it was going towards this purpose, and they just can't hide those kinds of donations. So that was the first reading of that, and I discussed it with the administrator, and he passed it on to the attorney's office, and we have the okay to have a second reading of that in our next meeting.
Thank you. Commissioner Appel, anything from Parks?
Not much, no. Hiring season is starting, 300 some people being hired. We recently passed a resolution on to council about a $450,000 contract with Davey Tree Service. Because all of forestry's money is coming from the Stormwater Fund, that leaves no forestry department to be able to work on park trees. So parks needed the ability to be able to have somebody that could respond to tree situations. During the meeting, we also tried to introduce invasive species guidelines. So the new contractor would be following some of the best management practices moving forward for invasive species, or preventing the spread of invasive species through equipment decontamination. If they're going to be working in our natural areas, we're hoping that we will help them to use the best practices. Other than that, that's parks for the time being. Ice rinks have been open on the climate note. So I think they've had about 24 good skating days over the course of the winter. So not great, and described by the Parks Department head as a labor of love. Tough to keep that ice nice.
Yeah. Thanks. Commissioner Gibrandl?
We've had some canceled meetings, but we did have a working session, and the thing that we're germane to this organization is the initial thinking about doing some transportation-oriented zoning or overlay districts to be able to think about how to concentrate density around the areas where we have, well-working bus lines and things like that. So thinking about taking a couple of corridors and see how it goes. So it's all in the super early stages, but there was some discussion around that.
So what, you'd increase the zoning?
I'm not sure how it's actually going to really play out. And again, it was just the beginning, but looking at opportunities to be able to make certain high traffic transportation corridors that have public transportation along them to be able to allow for certain kinds of development to happen there that may be different than how it's zoned ordinarily. So
Good idea.
Great, thank you.
it's happening in many places, so this is, yeah.
Thanks. Report from council members?
Well, I had a couple of, as some of you, if you were reading your email, might have caught that we had the big team effort to do the David Fair interview for Issues of the Environment, all about our old resolution about nuclear emergency preparedness and the potassium iodide pills. So you would not believe the behind the scenes that went into that with John Mirsky and Chip and Dr. Stoltz and everybody. So, and I want to thank you all. I had all 10 memos in front of me and made it through the interviews. And so that information is out there for the public. And then just for Monday night's meeting, I just went quickly through the council meeting agenda, and there's a few things on there. There's a memorandum from the Parks Commission about turning the center of the city available for public rental for people down at the library block. And so that's on the communications from the mayor, administrator. And then there's a couple consent agenda, 400,000, Chris, for tree planting. And then also our resolution to become a member of the Washtenaw Regional Resource Management Authority, the WRRMA. That's on the consent agenda. And then the last two things that might be of interest to you all. Interestingly, the Lower Town Area Mobility Study, which is around 650,000, which was required an 8-vote majority at the last council meeting and failed, it's back. And it's, Mayor Taylor is directing the city administrator to include that funding in the city budget. So that should be an interesting discussion to bring back that in a different logistical format of voting, that Lower Town Mobility Study. And then lastly, there's a resolution regarding, which I haven't read yet, regarding the Washtenaw County Mental Health and Public Safety millage. Something about that, too. Yes.
I have a question about, is that to repeal the 2017 council action allocating the rebate go 40% to affordable housing, 40% to climate action, and 20% to pedestrian and bicycle safety? That's what it is.
Yes.
That's
Or something to that effect. I haven't actually read the detail.
It is indeed an effort to undo that allocation, overturn, the vote.
And what is the rationale behind the resolution, or is there no rationale given?
The discussion had at the council table has been that the new council members, there are some that have expressed a desire to overturn that previous direction because they didn't have a part in the discussion, and they didn't necessarily share those priorities. Councilmember Lum, who has introduced this, was opposed to this both times. It was passed by council in the summer prior to the county mental health and public safety millage. There's a citizen group that believes that in addition to the millions of dollars we're, as Ann Arbor, contributing to the mental health and public safety programs, that we should contribute all the money to those programs. So this is what I would call simply a budget and resource allocation debate that we're having. And I'll be very direct. Like, this is about not funding climate change stuff.
Well, okay, so the question, is it defined in the resolution how the millage would it flow just simply into the general fund? Or how is it crafted, do you know?
We're bringing that up.
I mean, the resolution have to have specific wording. I'm just wondering if it's known yet. I mean, is the millage rebate simply stay as a separate bucket, or does it go into a specific bucket like the general fund? Is that, it just voids it?
Yeah.
Yes, I think one of the logic behind it was that council approved a survey of the residents, that Tom Crawford and others worked on to try and gauge an accurate reading from the residents as to what they intended. And that survey is to be released mid-March. And so that barely gives staff time to redo their budget. They're doing the budget on the 40-40-20, the last 2017 directive. Mm-hmm. So this, I think, is maybe opening the door for them to be ready to pivot. And further, if it isn't coming from the mental health millage. One thing I'll say, just anecdotal evidence from talking to other council members, I think people want to fund climate action and pedestrian safety and affordable housing, but there's just sensitivity to it coming from the mental health and public safety millage bucket. So I think that we should still press onward with our budgets for climate action and pedestrian safety and affordable housing, and it's just going to be getting it in the right bucket, in my opinion.
If I may offer a comment, in the end, we'll see where the money is, come May 20th, and we'll see whether or not, the city puts its money where its mouth is in the end. I mean, I suppose it doesn't matter in the end whether it comes from the millage rebate or out of the general fund, as long as the money is perceived to be going to the right places.
And I would add on to that, piggyback on that's really where the budget planning and the things you and I have talked about offline about measuring the outcomes and the metrics, so that we aren't just throwing money at climate action goals, but we're throwing it at things that we're going to have up publicly transparent, communicating on dashboards and tracking it and review. I think you were the one possibly who had suggested that we review it quarterly and monthly, and so everything is constantly being reviewed at least once a year.
Yeah, I guess my 2 cents is funding the plan is the most important thing, but I understand this is not the resolution that either of you are the source of it, but I do have trouble understanding how the city can essentially go back on a promise that was made to voters before the vote. I mean, that's how I look at it, that, there was a promise made that that's how the money would be used, and personally, I'd be really disappointed if that
Well, and it passed by 73%. I mean, it wasn't like there was an unclear statement from the voters. The voters supported it by 73%.
And as you know, I think the opposing argument is that the ballot language itself, when the voter is in the booth, the ballot language did not say. So if they hadn't gotten the email from their favorite environmental agencies or Mayor Taylor's email, they wouldn't know when they're in the voting booth that there was a 40-40-20 on that.
Well, it was widely covered in the
Yeah,
local.
it was
Yes.
in the paper.
Yeah.
It was on WEMU, I know for sure there were at least 2 major articles in MLive or Ann Arbor News, so it was covered. And, I mean, I've written this to you, and if I can just speak openly, it was impossible to put in the resolution climate action, because there were 8 entities that were getting rebates. And there was no way that anybody was going to write ballot language that says, please approve for money for mental health, but because 8 entities already do policing, that entity 1 is going to spend the rebate this way, entity 2 is going to do it this way, Ann Arbor is going to do it this way, 4 is going to do it this way, 5 is going to, that's impossible. So the argument that it wasn't in the ballot language is not it just doesn't hold water. Sorry. It's impossible to craft a ballot language that says, here's 8 exceptions, and each one of these is doing it differently, and some are spending it in climate, and some haven't decided, and some are thinking of doing this. That's ridiculous. Sorry. It's a strong word, but that's the way I feel.
For
Well,
a
there
county
are
ballot.
10 people in town that feel this way, and sadly, 5 of them are on council. But yes, the rest of us did find out about this and did vote on this for this reason.
Yes.
Well, again, the survey, which is hopefully accurate, valid measurements, will be out in mid-March, or the results will be in mid-March.
And the survey makes no mention of the fact that council took this action and that they informed people in advance so that people who did vote on it, like myself, said, yes, I'm in favor of $3.5 million of Ann Arbor taxpayer money going to mental health, but I'd also like to see a $900,000 going to climate action and $900,000 to affordable housing. That's the way I voted. And I think that's what a lot of the other commissioners feel.
And I do want to underline, I do not see any lack of commitment or appetite for funding those city priorities. And I think it's just semantics on how of the budget process.
We'll see.
So,
Anything further? Oh,
so looking forward, if we are going to have a fully sustainable city that has zero carbon footprint in 25 years, the amount of money required to do renewable energy sources is way more than any of this amounts to. The city's going to have to step up financially very significantly to reach that goal.
Yes, and that's why I'm excited to work with Mr. Mursky and others on communications, so that we can clearly, in plain language, get our residents on board with helping us in every way that we can.
anything further from council? Do we have a report from staff?
Yes, we do. There's been a lot of work on the Green Fleets team that I wanted to share. The 3 bolts that EV bolts are here. They're not in service yet, but they are here. The chargers were ordered. Recently, we've been working on low-use vehicles and looking at vehicles that have less than 200 gallons of fuel used in a year, with the hope that we could figure out whether we can reduce some of our fleet size to then we can look at electrification options or other options for the vehicles that are left. So that's been an interesting process. We've invited, so far we've had police and fire come talk to us about their vehicles. A lot of the vehicles are staying in the fleet after we've talked to folks, but we're doing that process, and it's been interesting because it's the first time we're doing it.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
As a little sideline to that. So one thing I've noticed actually during the environmental commission meeting, this happened a couple of times. There was a police vehicle out in the parking lot that sat there idling for the entire time that we were in here, and there was nobody in the vehicle. And so I'm just wondering if has there ever been dialogue with the police around the idling issue, which just
They all
seems
do
to
it.
be completely against any effort to use better vehicles? Is there any kind of dialogue or awareness around that has happened to date?
Yes, and in fact, that's something that I'm passionate about, and so I'm going to be bringing it back to Green Fleets after we get through the first couple tasks that we have in front of us, because there is equipment out there that can let them do the things they need to do in terms of keeping their computers on, keeping the temperature of the vehicle at an appropriate temperature, as well as keeping lights and sirens and all that going as well. So there's equipment out there. It's just a question of seeing if it's a good fit for our fleet.
Okay, thanks.
Several of us went, actually our whole office went to Grand Rapids recently for the Michigan Climate Action Network's first conference. It was fantastic. It was exciting to hear that a lot of things will be changing at the state level with new leadership at the state. So Liesl Clark is the new director of the DEQ, which is going to be changing its name, but she was there, and so it was exciting to hear that. We are working on an application for a peer learning exchange through USDN to learn about Blue LA, which is a low-income EV car sharing program in LA. So I'm taking the lead on putting that grant together. As Commissioner Mursky mentioned, working on the EV readiness ordinance. Dr. Stoltz went to her first meeting of the Carbon Neutrality Committee, I think it was last week. So that's exciting to be working on. I would put a plug for the next Sustainability Forum. C's Dean Dr. Overpeck, as well as yours truly, will be speaking about Climate Change 201. So not the basics, but a little bit more deep into that. It'll be March 21st. In Downtown Library at 7 p.m. And our last forum was fantastic. We had 93 people there. That's great. So thank you to everybody who came out to our last forum.
It was reported many more people than there were at the council meeting.
The same evening, yes. In terms of, we have a credible amount of people who are interested, students who are interested in interning in our office. So we're going through the process right now of figuring out what we need from interns. We're going to be doing cohort 2 of the racial equity training that's sustainability focused that Commissioner Mursky and I were in last time. And that'll be kicking off in May. So if anybody is particularly interested in being part of that, it's a 6-session course, let me know. The city hired an equity consultant to develop a comprehensive equity plan for the city. So that's exciting news, and we were a part of the selection process for that consultant. We're working with 2 student groups, and both of them are interested in working on greening our rental housing with a particular focus on the student renter population. We're going to be doing some interesting data analysis by matching up our rental database, permit database, with our permitting database and seeing where there's energy efficiency possibilities and just learning a lot more about our rental housing stock. Let's see. USDN, there are several cities coming to Ann Arbor to learn about our rental licensing program with the hope of doing some of these greening rental housing standards ordinances. And that'll be March 12th. So it's kind of exciting that we get to share about our process. And Dr. Stoltz and John Fournier are in DC right now at a renewables boot camp. So that's the last update I wanted to share.
Thank you. Our next schedule, sorry.
I have one last update since we won't meet before this. Friday, March 15th, from 11 to 2, there's a global climate strike. Washtenaw County's version of that will be happening on the Diag. I would encourage young people, students, anyone to come out and join us in that action.
Great. Our next meeting will be 7 p.m. Thursday, March 28th. I think we will be hearing from Jen Lawson with more detail on the status and the situation of Allen Creek. Not positive, but I think that's on the agenda there. Anyone like to make public comment?
Can I make one other? Oh, sorry, go ahead. No, please.
Just state your name if you would. Confine the remarks to 3 minutes, please.
Yeah, I won't take up 3 minutes. Ken Garber. I just came in late and I wasn't even going to speak at all. But since the county millage came up, thought this is a free shot. And I probably wouldn't get my time in at the council meeting. And 2 council members are here, so I just want to put my 2 cents in that I support the 40-40-20 split. I think it's important to have a dedicated stream of revenue for what is clearly the most important issue of our time, and the city needs to take a leadership position on it. And it's been sorely underfunded until now, and I support many of the comments I heard here tonight from the commissioners, and I urge my council members to think hard about this and go forward with the current split for the city share of the county millage money. That's it.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment? John, did you?
One other brief announcement. The university has an annual sustainability lecture. It's called, I think it's called WEGI or
It's Weegi. I just learned
Good,
that.
thank you. And that is actually the night before on the 14th. It's at, I believe at Hill, and it's quite a distinguished speaker. It's a Costa Rican woman who's considered to be the architect of the Paris Accords. So she was the one really behind the scenes putting the whole Paris Climate Accord together, and she's speaking at Hill. So if you're interested, check that. That's March 14th.
Anything else? All right, we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
You said Waggy?
Waggy.
I was told Weegi, just.
Waggy.